Thank you for clicking on this video. Today, I want to take you through a chilling criminal case that happened quite a long time ago in Indonesia. The main figure in this case is a woman nicknamed Mommy Rose, whose real name was Sumiarsi. She was born and raised in a rural area of Jombang, East Java, sometime in the 1960s. As a child, Sumiarsi lived with her parents and 5 younger siblings in a family struggling with extreme poverty. Because of their difficult financial situation, she only attended elementary school and was unable to graduate. In fact, at the time, it was quite common for girls to stop their education after primary or middle school and get married. However, many young people from her hometown chose a different path, leaving their village to seek opportunities in big cities. This inspired Sumiarsi, and by the time she was 11 years old, she was already dreaming of escaping her rural life to build a better future in major cities like Surabaya or Jakarta. Unfortunately, her family couldn't afford to send her away, so her dreams remained just that, dreams. Despite growing up in the countryside, Sumiarsi's beauty made her stand out, and she quickly became the village belle. On top of that, she knew how to take care of herself and dressed more stylishly than her peers. Because of this, even as a young teenager, she frequently attracted the attention of the local men. From there, Sumiarsi was introduced to romance, dating multiple men, and even changing partners frequently. By the age of 15, she entered a serious relationship with a young man from her village named Sawadi. Eventually, in 1963, despite having nothing but love, they decided to get married. However, because they had no financial stability or proper preparations, their married life was filled with hardship. Suwadi didn't have a steady job. He worked as a day laborer with an unstable income. This meant that from the very beginning, their household was constantly struggling to make ends meet. At this point, Sumiarsi started to feel jealous of her peers who had better lives. She envied how they could afford beauty treatments and flaunt sparkling jewelry. The contrast between her life and theirs made her complain to her husband. But instead of receiving comfort, her complaints only led to frequent arguments between them. In 1964, just a year after their wedding, Sumiarsi gave birth to their first child, a baby boy named Sugeng. However, instead of bringing joy, Sugeng's arrival only worsened their financial struggles. Sumiarsi felt suffocated. She could no longer focus on her appearance like before. Finally, when Sugeng was just 40 days old, the couple made a life-changing decision. They divorced. Since Sugeng was still an infant and needed his mother's milk, custody naturally went to Sumiarsi. However, shortly after, she made a life-changing decision, leaving her child in the care of her mother so she could carry out her grand plan, traveling alone to Jakarta to change her fate. Sumiarsi believed she had what it took to make it in the big city. Despite her rural background, she could read and write, was a skilled cook, and knew how to take care of her appearance. Confident in her abilities, she was certain that these skills would help her find a stable job in the capital. So, in 1964, at just 17 years old, Sumiarsi took a bold leap, setting off for Jakarta alone, determined to build a better life. But when she arrived, nothing went as she had imagined. She frantically applied for jobs all over the city, but after more than a week, she still couldn't find one. Meanwhile, the little money she had brought with her was running out fast. For the first time, she truly felt the harsh reality of urban life, where the glamorous dreams seen on TV were nothing more than distant illusions. At first, she came to the city with ambitions of success, picturing a luxurious life straight out of a television drama. But after just a short time, her goal was no longer to get rich. It was simply to survive in this unforgiving city. With no other options, Sumiarsi started looking for any job that would allow her to make a living. Eventually, she managed to find work at a small food stall near the Pulau Gadung bus terminal in East Jakarta. However, the job was washing dishes, and the wages were so low that she could barely afford to eat. The dreams of a life-changing move to Jakarta had quickly been replaced by the cold, hard truth. Life in the city was anything but easy. Since the food stall was located near Pulau Gadung bus terminal, a hub for bus drivers and conductors, Sumiarsi quickly became the center of attention thanks to her striking looks. The men, especially the bus drivers and their assistants, would frequently flirt with and tease her. Even the owner of the food stall was delighted, as business had noticeably picked up since Sumiarsi started working there. In fact, he soon realized that she was like a lucky charm attracting more customers to his stall. Because of this, Sumiarsi got a small pay raise, but it was still nowhere near enough to afford the glamorous lifestyle she had dreamed of in Jakarta. Not long after she started working at the food stall, a regular customer named Hendrik approached her. Hendrik showered her with compliments, saying that a beautiful woman like her didn't belong in a tiny food stall scrubbing dishes. He then made an enticing offer: a job at an upscale restaurant in Ancol, North Jakarta, with a salary far higher than what she was making. With dreams of wealth still burning inside her, Sumiarsi didn't hesitate. She immediately accepted the offer. Later, Hendrik took her to a luxurious restaurant in Ancol. The moment she stepped inside, Sumiarsi was overwhelmed by the place's dazzling atmosphere. She was introduced to the restaurant manager, who was instantly captivated by both her beauty and innocence. Without a second thought, she was hired on the spot. At first, her job was simple: serving food and drinks to customers. Her working hours, 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. With a salary of 30,000 rupiah per week, Sumiarsi felt completely satisfied. To put this into perspective, at the time, the cheapest motorbike cost around 50,000 rupiah, while a luxury motorbike was only about 260,000 rupiah. This meant that after just a few months of working, she could afford to buy a motorbike, something she had never even dared to dream of before. With her newfound income, Sumiarsi began to change her lifestyle. She spent more time on her appearance, dressed stylishly, and indulged in the luxurious feeling she had always longed for. However, after just 1 week on the job, she started to sense that something was off. She noticed that her female co-workers were dancing provocatively in front of customers. Then, an older woman, whom everyone referred to as Mommy, approached her and subtly suggested that Sumiarsi should also try performing for the guests. At first, Sumiarsi felt uncomfortable, but not wanting to lose a high-paying job, she reluctantly agreed. On her very first performance, Sumiarsi captivated the customers with her fresh, exotic beauty. Thanks to this, she not only kept her job, but also began receiving weekly bonuses of up to 41,000 rupiah, which was even higher than her base salary. But that's when the harsh truth hit her. This was not a restaurant. It was a nightclub. Her job wasn't just about serving food or performing. It involved darker services meant to please the customers. Although she knew this kind of work wasn't considered respectable in Indonesia, the lure of money was too strong. Sumiarsi decided to continue. From that moment on, she wasn't just a dancer, she gradually accepted special requests from customers to earn even more money. As her earnings skyrocketed, Sumiarsi began mingling with the mommies, women who managed other girls working in the nightlife industry. Then, one day, the mommy of the nightclub decided that the name Sumiarsi didn't fit this line of work. She insisted on giving her a new name, Rose. Mommy said that Sumiarsi was like a beautiful flower that bloomed and radiated fragrance in the night. From that moment on, Sumiarsi became known as Rose. After spending 4 years in Jakarta's nightlife industry, Rose's life had transformed completely. She now lived in a luxurious house, owned a Suzuki Carry, the car she had always dreamed of, and adorned herself with expensive jewelry that she had once only wished for. For the past 4 years, Rose had never once returned to her hometown. But in 1968, during the Lebaran holiday, she finally decided to go back to Jombang, East Java. This time, she didn't return empty-handed. She brought jewelry for her younger siblings, money for her parents to renovate their home, and, most importantly, she was reunited with her son, Sugeng, now a lively, energetic 4-year-old boy, running around everywhere. During this visit, Rose made a promise. She would send money regularly so that Sugeng could go to school and have a better future. After visiting her family and son in her hometown, Rose quickly returned to Jakarta. There, she was in a relationship with a wealthy businessman named Hassan, who was already married with children. Despite this, Rose willingly became his mistress in exchange for a lavish lifestyle. However, when Rose became pregnant with Hassan's child, everything started to change. At first, Hassan promised to marry her and even offered to buy her a house in Senayan, South Jakarta. But as the pregnancy progressed, Hassan's attitude began to shift. Eventually, he chose his legal family over Rose and abandoned her, leaving her to give birth alone in isolation. With no other choice, Rose gave birth in Jakarta without a husband by her side. She named her daughter May Wati. At first, she tried to raise the baby on her own, but due to the nature of her work, she couldn't provide long-term care. When May Wati was just 4 months old, Rose made the painful decision to send her daughter to her mother in the village, entrusting her care to family. She then returned to Jakarta to continue her work in the nightlife industry. After years of working in nightclubs, Rose had saved up a substantial amount of money and gained a deep understanding of how the business worked. She decided it was time to start her own venture in the same field. She rented a townhouse in Kebayoran Baru, South Jakarta, and opened a salon and a special massage service. She also recruited former colleagues from the nightclubs she had worked at, hiring them as staff for her new establishment. From that moment on, Rose was no longer just a dancer or a hostess. She officially became Mommy Rose, a madam in the industry. However, less than a year after opening, her business failed to take off. There weren't enough customers, and the income wasn't enough to cover expenses, leaving Rose struggling with financial losses. In the end, she was forced to shut down her salon permanently. This failure sent Rose into a deep crisis. She grew disillusioned with life in Jakarta, feeling lost and lonely. Memories of her hometown and her 2 children, who were being raised by her parents, weighed heavily on her mind. In the end, she made a life-changing decision. She left Jakarta behind and returned to Jombang, East Java, where she was born and raised. Back in her hometown, Rose shed her former identity and became Sumiarsi once again. She lived with her parents and 2 children, hoping to reclaim the peaceful life she once had. With her beauty still radiant, Sumiarsi quickly caught the attention of many men in the village. Wanting a companion in her life, she began a relationship with a local man named Jais Adi Prayitno, commonly known as Prayak. At the time, Prayak was a divorced man with 2 children. Both of them had experienced life's ups and downs and were willing to accept each other's pasts. They fell in love, and after a few years of dating, they officially got married in 1974. At first, they lived together in Jombang, but due to financial struggles and the lack of stable jobs, Sumiarsi convinced her husband to move to Surabaya in search of better opportunities. In Surabaya, Sumiarsi believed she had a strong understanding of the nightlife entertainment business and could make a significant amount of money from it. She persuaded her husband to open a business on Jalan Kupang Gunung Timur 1 in Kecamatan Putat Jaya, the same area as Gang Dali, which at the time was the largest red light district in Southeast Asia. With years of experience in the industry, Sumiarsi saw Gang Dali as a gold mine, a prime location to establish a highly profitable business. When her husband agreed and supported the idea, they used Sumiarsi's savings to purchase a small house in the area, planning to turn it into a brothel where customers could choose women based on their preferences. But this time, Sumiarsi wasn't going to work as an escort herself. Instead, she took on the role of recruiter and manager, overseeing the women working at her establishment. This marked her official transformation into Mommy, the madam of a brothel. Observing that other brothels in Gang Dali were filled with older, less attractive women, Sumiarsi decided to set herself apart. She aimed for a premium selection, a team of young, well-groomed, and attractive women who could draw in high-paying customers. Determined to create the most upscale brothel in the area, she implemented exclusive and luxurious standards. She recruited 10 women, all meticulously screened and selected based on age, only accepting those between 17 and 25 years old. Not only that, but Sumiarsi also chose only the most beautiful, well-dressed, and well-mannered women, those with charming and lively personalities. In her view, the ultimate goal was to ensure that customers felt comfortable and genuinely happy. For this reason, she named her brothel Happy Home. Unlike the other brothels in Gang Dali, Happy Home was lavishly designed and fully equipped. She transformed it into a nightclub-style entertainment complex, similar to those in Jakarta, offering exotic dance performances, karaoke, luxury food, and drinks. This was also the most expensive establishment in the area, with a service fee of 25,000 rupiah per woman, significantly higher than other brothels. Upon opening, Happy Home immediately attracted a flood of customers, quickly becoming the go-to spot for wealthy men, especially those from the upper class. One of Happy Home's most frequent and high-profile customers was Marine Lieutenant Colonel Purwanto. At the time, Purwanto was the head of the Navy Cooperative, living in Surabaya with his wife and 3 children. As a regular at Happy Home, he developed a close relationship with Sumiarsi and her husband. Recognizing Happy Home's popularity and luxurious appeal, Purwanto saw a business opportunity. He proposed a partnership with Sumiarsi and her husband to open a second branch of Happy Home. Without hesitation, Sumiarsi and her husband agreed, especially since Purwanto offered to be the primary investor and provide protection, ensuring the business could operate safely without external threats. After reaching an agreement, Purwanto purchased a building located just 2 doors down from Happy Home and transformed it into a brothel similar to Happy Home. This new establishment was named Sumber Rejeki. The entire investment cost for setting up Sumber Rejeki was covered by Purwanto, while Sumiarsi and her husband were responsible for managing the business. However, Purwanto set specific conditions. He wanted to receive 22 million rupiah per year from the business profits. If Sumiarsi failed to pay on time, she would be penalized 20% of the overdue amount. To put into perspective how large 22 million rupiah was at the time, in the 1980s, a brand new Honda Accord only cost 21 million rupiah. If converted to 2024 currency rates, a Honda Accord today costs approximately 959 million rupiah. This means that 22 million rupiah in 1980 could be equivalent to nearly 1 billion rupiah or more in today's value. With such an enticing proposal, Sumiarsi agreed immediately. And so, in 1980, Sumber Rejeki officially opened its doors. Thanks to the prestigious reputation of Happy Home, Sumber Rejeki quickly attracted a large customer base. Within less than a year, its daily revenue reached 2 million rupiah, making it one of the most successful brothels in Gang Dali. In the first year, Sumiarsi successfully paid Purwanto the full 22 million rupiah as per their initial agreement. However, Purwanto was aware that Sumiarsi's actual profits were much higher than this figure, so he demanded an increase, raising the required payment to 25 million rupiah per year. At first, this higher payment wasn't a major issue for them. But after 2 years, a child exploitation scandal surfaced at another brothel in Gang Dali, leading to a major crackdown that disrupted the entire district for an extended period. As a result, both Happy Home and Sumber Rejeki suffered severe losses, with revenues plummeting and operations struggling to stay afloat. Despite this, Purwanto remained firm in demanding the full 25 million rupiah as promised. Since Sumiarsi no longer had enough funds to pay on time, she fell behind on payments, causing her late fees to accumulate rapidly. The situation led to growing tension between Sumiarsi and Purwanto. After multiple unsuccessful attempts to collect his debt, Purwanto began to lose patience. In a fit of rage, he stormed into Sumiarsi's house and destroyed several pieces of furniture. But he didn't stop there. Purwanto went even further, threatening to report them to the police, accusing Sumiarsi and her husband of employing underage workers in their business. Facing the real threat of imprisonment, Sumiarsi panicked and begged for either a reduction in the debt or an extension on the payment deadline. But Purwanto refused to listen to any more excuses. After issuing his threats, he left, leaving Sumiarsi and her husband completely shaken and desperate. At that moment, they only had 5 million rupiah in their possession, meaning they were still 20 million rupiah short on their payment. Terrified by Purwanto's pressure, the next day, during the holy month of Ramadan, Sumiarsi and her husband decided to visit Purwanto's house to apologize and try to convince him to withdraw his threats. They brought both of Sumiarsi's children along, Maywati, her 15-year-old daughter, and Sugeng, her eldest son. The family arrived at Purwanto's house on Duku Street, Japang Timur, Surabaya. When they got there, Purwanto welcomed them inside and invited them to sit in the living room. At the time, Purwanto lived with his pregnant wife and 3 children, none of whom had any idea about his shady business dealings with Sumiarsi. In the living room, Sumiarsi immediately apologized and explained her financial situation. She said that her business was struggling with heavy losses, making it impossible for her to repay the debt on time. She earnestly begged Purwanto for understanding and forgiveness. Strangely, Purwanto, who was typically harsh and cold, suddenly became unusually gentle. His eyes never left Wati, Sumiarsi's daughter. This surprised everyone in the living room. Even more astonishing was that Purwanto suddenly agreed to forgive the debt and even willingly withdrew his threats. After some conversation, they bid farewell and left. Sumiarsi and Prayat breathed a sigh of relief at Purwanto's forgiveness. However, they still harbored suspicions. Purwanto's rapid change in attitude, especially his eyes constantly fixed on Wati, made them uneasy. And indeed, their intuition was not wrong. The next day, Purwanto unexpectedly appeared at their house with a horrifying request. He wanted Wati, Sumiarsi's daughter. He wanted to make her his mistress in exchange for the debt. This was because Purwanto had become attracted to Wati's innocent beauty. Sumiarsi, who had suspected Purwanto's lustful glances at her daughter since yesterday, now found herself in an impossible situation. On one hand, she dared not refuse for fear of the consequences. On the other hand, she couldn't let Wati become a victim of this cruel man. Finally, out of fear, Sumiarsi could only remain silent, unable to protest. From that day on, Purwanto frequently visited, constantly trying to get close to Wati and capture her attention. This made the young girl terrified. Faced with this distressing situation, Sumiarsi and Prayat decided to urgently arrange a wedding for Wati and her then-boyfriend, Adi Saputro, a police sergeant. They hoped that once Wati was married, Purwanto would back off out of respect. However, Wati's marriage did nothing to stop Purwanto. Instead, it enraged him even more. Furious, he stormed into Happy Home, shouting and demanding that Sumiarsi hand over Wati to him. This time, Sumiarsi found the courage to refuse, arguing that Wati was now a married woman. But instead of backing down, Purwanto exploded in rage. He trashed the place, overturning furniture and destroying everything in sight, still demanding that Wati be given to him that very night. He then issued an ultimatum. The next day, they were to bring Wati to a motel he had already prepared. He refused to accept any excuses and left, leaving behind only threats. Sumiarsi and Prayat had no choice but to comply, fearing for their family's safety. But desperate to protect Wati, Sumiarsi came up with a plan. She prepared a sanitary pad stained with fake blood, intending to fake Wati's menstrual cycle in hopes that it would allow her to escape the inevitable horror of the night. With no other options, Wati reluctantly went along with the plan. The following day, as ordered, Prayat escorted Wati to the motel where Purwanto was waiting. Wati entered the room, while Prayat waited in the parking lot. As soon as Purwanto saw Wati, he immediately dragged her inside. But before he could make his move, Wati quickly pretended that she had just started her period and showed him the pre-prepared sanitary pad as proof. At that moment, Purwanto's fury exploded. He felt betrayed, and his gentle demeanor instantly turned violent. Blinded by rage, he brutally beat Wati, mercilessly attacking her, leaving her severely injured, her face swollen and bruised. After viciously assaulting her, Purwanto stormed out, leaving Wati trembling in pain and fear. She could only sob helplessly before running out to find Prayat, who was waiting in the parking lot. When Prayat saw Wati's face covered in bruises, he was shocked and horrified. Without hesitation, Prayat immediately took Wati home. When they arrived, the entire family fell into a stunned silence. Seeing Wati in such a horrific state left everyone devastated. Sumiarsi, who had endured too much for too long, was no longer willing to stay silent. This time, she was furious. The only thought consuming her mind was revenge. And from that moment, a horrific crime was set into motion. That night, as their rage reached its peak, Sumiarsi and Prayat decided it was time to eliminate Purwanto. They quickly reached out to family members and trusted individuals who could help carry out their plan. In total, 6 people came together. Daim, Prayat's nephew Nano, Prayat's son from his previous marriage, Sugeng, Sumiarsi's son from her previous marriage, Adi Saputro, Wadi's husband, a police sergeant who was furious that his wife had been targeted by Purwanto. Once the group was assembled, they meticulously planned every detail and gathered their weapons, including a heavy iron pestle and a cast iron mortar. On the afternoon of August 13, 1988, the 6 of them set out toward Purwanto's house, using Sumiarsi's Suzuki Carry. However, when they arrived, they noticed that the area in front of Purwanto's house was crowded. A group of local young men was playing volleyball right outside his yard. Realizing that the timing wasn't right, they decided to temporarily drive around the neighborhood, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. After some time, when the area in front of Purwanto's house had quieted down, they returned, pretending to be visitors. Purwanto suspected nothing. He greeted them warmly and invited them inside, leading them into the living room. At the time, inside Purwanto's house, his pregnant wife, Sumariatun, was in the kitchen, along with a young niece. Meanwhile, his 2 younger sons were outside. Bismoko, his eldest son at home, was playing in the front yard. Prasetyo, his second son, was also playing outside, completely unaware of the horrific events about to unfold inside. Purwanto's eldest son was not home, as he was studying at the Naval Academy, leaving the household relatively calm and vulnerable. Inside the living room, the group sat down, pretending to engage in a casual conversation with Purwanto. At first, Sumiarsi remained composed, beginning the conversation with complaints about business debts, further lowering Purwanto's guard. Meanwhile, Sugeng, already gripping the iron pestle, stood up and pretended to step outside for a moment. Purwanto, fully focused on the conversation with Sumiarsi, didn't notice Sugeng's actions, and then the moment of reckoning arrived. Sugeng returned, and without warning he swung the heavy iron pestle directly into the back of Purwanto's head. The brutal blow sent Purwanto crashing to the floor, blood pouring across the room. The loud impact immediately caught the attention of Bismoko, Purwanto's second son, who ran inside from the front yard to see what had happened. But before the boy could react, the group pounced on him. They used the same iron pestle to strike Bismoko, knocking him unconscious instantly. In a panic, the group quickly dragged the lifeless bodies of Purwanto and Bismoko into the garage. But just as they were doing so, Prasetyo, the youngest son, unexpectedly walked in, only to witness the horrifying scene of his father and brother being dragged away. Terrified, Prasetyo let out a blood-curdling scream and ran toward the door to escape. Realizing what was happening, Sugeng immediately gave chase. However, Prasetyo was still just a child, and his tiny legs couldn't carry him fast enough. Within seconds, Sugeng caught up, grabbed him, and covered his mouth, muffling his screams as he dragged the terrified boy back inside. The sound of Prasetyo's cries had already reached Sumariatun, Purwanto's pregnant wife, who immediately rushed out of the kitchen to check on what was happening. She was holding her young niece in her arms. The moment Sumariatun stepped into the living room, she was frozen in shock at the horrific scene. The room was in chaos and the floor was stained with blood. Before she could react, both she and the child were immediately overpowered. Leaving no witnesses behind, Sugeng strangled both of them until they stopped breathing. Once the murders were complete, they dragged all 5 bodies into the garage and stuffed them into Purwanto's Toyota Kijang. The group quickly cleaned the crime scene, erasing any traces of blood or evidence. When everything was in order, they prepared to leave. Sugeng and Adi drove the Toyota Kijang, carrying the bodies of the entire Purwanto family, while Sumiarsi and the others followed behind in the Suzuki Carry. They headed straight toward the mountains of Kota Batu, East Java, about a 2.5-hour drive from Surabaya. On the way, they stopped at a roadside shop, purchasing a jerry can of gasoline and making a makeshift torch. Then, they continued their journey to a remote, mountainous area in Kota Batu. Upon arrival, they parked near the edge of a steep cliff. At this point, Purwanto's head was still bleeding, so they wrapped it in a plastic bag to avoid leaving any traces. Sugeng then poured gasoline all over the vehicle and lit the torch. Within seconds, flames engulfed the car. As the Toyota Kijang became an inferno, they pushed it off the cliff, sending it plummeting into the abyss, transforming into a blazing fireball in the darkness. Their plan was clear: to stage the scene to look like a tragic car accident. Everything had been meticulously planned the day before. Once their mission was complete, the group quickly left the scene, returning to Surabaya. On their way back, they were confident that their plan had worked, believing the case would be ruled as a tragic accident. And at first, it seemed they were right. That very same night, passers-by traveling through the area were horrified to see a burning car at the bottom of the ravine. Panicked, they immediately alerted the police. Shortly after, authorities arrived at the scene and worked with local residents to extinguish the flames. Brave villagers climbed down the 50-foot cliff, trying to reach the wreckage. When the fire was finally under control, everyone stood in shock at the grisly discovery inside. 5 charred bodies were found inside the burned-out vehicle. At first, investigators assumed it was a terrible car accident, believing the vehicle had lost control, plunged off the cliff, and burst into flames upon impact. However, during the initial investigation, a witness came forward with a crucial piece of information. They claimed they had seen the car already on fire before it fell off the cliff. This detail raised immediate suspicion. If it were truly an accident, the car should have exploded only after crashing, not before it hit the ground. Initially, police considered the possibility that the car had caught fire due to an accident on the road. But the witness insisted they never heard the sound of a crash. Even more suspicious, there were no skid marks or signs of an accident on the road. As the bodies were transported for forensic examination, more disturbing clues began to emerge. The autopsy results revealed alarming evidence. The victims sustained multiple blunt force trauma injuries, which were inconsistent with a car accident. Bruises and ligature marks on the necks indicated that some had been strangled to death. Purwanto's face and head were wrapped in plastic, proving that his head had been covered before his death. These findings left no doubt for the police. This was not an accident, but a premeditated murder. The case was immediately classified as a special investigation. After identifying the victims, the police made a shocking discovery. One of the murdered individuals was Purwanto, a Marine lieutenant colonel. The news sent shockwaves across the country, quickly becoming a national headline. The public was in disbelief, asking, who would dare to brutally murder an entire military officer's family? As the nation speculated, Sumiarsi and Prayat played their roles perfectly, pretending to be shocked and devastated by the news. They even attended the funeral at Purwanto's home, where the family was grieving. Because of their previous business relationship with Purwanto, they were welcomed by the victim's family. They even helped clean the house before the bodies were brought back for burial. At this point, Purwanto's eldest son, who had just returned from the Naval Academy, was completely devastated, struggling to comprehend the mysterious accident that had wiped out his entire family. Relatives, including Prayat, a family member of Purwanto, tried to comfort him. The day after the funeral, police officially examined Purwanto's home, searching for any overlooked clues. And then, a critical piece of evidence emerged. During a thorough inspection, investigators discovered a small bloodstain on a light switch. This immediately led the police to a chilling conclusion. The family had likely been murdered inside the house, and their bodies were later transported to be disposed of. Further evidence reinforced this theory. No signs of forced entry. No valuables were stolen. This indicated that the killer had entered the house easily, without resistance, suggesting that the perpetrator was someone Purwanto knew personally. With this new perspective, the police began narrowing down suspects, focusing on individuals who had access to Purwanto's home. Investigators then started digging into Purwanto's past and his personal connections. The deeper they looked, the more disturbing details surfaced. Police uncovered that Purwanto had been involved in the management of a brothel, operating alongside a business partner in Gang Dali, Indonesia's most infamous red light district at the time. As they continued their financial investigation, they found a severe dispute between Purwanto and his former business associates, Sumiarsi and her husband, Prayat, co-owners of the Happy Home brothel. The primary reason? A massive unpaid debt that Sumiarsi owed Purwanto. With this crucial lead, police summoned Sumiarsi and Prayat for questioning. At first, the couple stuck to their lies, dodging questions and giving vague, inconsistent answers. But as detectives pressed harder, their statements became increasingly contradictory. Slowly, the cracks in their story widened, and they backed themselves into a corner. After a long and intense interrogation, Sumiarsi and Prayat finally broke down, confessing everything. Everything stemmed from Purwanto's coercion, forcing Wati, Sumiarsi's 15-year-old daughter, to become his mistress in exchange for clearing the debt. But what truly fueled their rage and ultimate decision to kill Purwanto was the brutal beating he inflicted on Wati at the hotel. Once the confessions were obtained, the case was fully uncovered, sending shockwaves across Indonesia. When the case went to trial, the court handed down harsh sentences for all those involved. Sumiarsi and Prayat, the masterminds, death sentence. Sugeng, the one who carried out the murder, death sentence. Nano and Daim, life imprisonment. Adi Saputro, a police officer and Wati's husband, was tried separately in a military court and also sentenced to death. The trial took place in 1989, drawing nationwide attention. 3 years later, on December 2, 1992, Adi Saputro was executed by firing squad, marking the end of a disgraced police officer who had aided in the crime. 9 years later, in 2001, Prayat suddenly died of a heart attack before his execution could be carried out. Finally, on June 9, 2008, Sumiarsi and Sugeng were executed by firing squad, bringing an end to a tragic saga that had lasted nearly 2 decades. During her final years in prison, Sumiarsi converted to Christianity. She devoted herself to repentance, spending her time in prayer and mentally preparing for her execution. In the final hour before their execution, Sumiarsi and her son Sugeng were allowed to meet one last time. In tears, Sumiarsi apologized to Sugeng, expressing deep remorse for dragging him into this terrible crime, which had ultimately led to his tragic fate. A female journalist from Jawa Pos, Ita Siti Nasia, spent 8 years researching and documenting the details of this case in her book, Mommy Rose. All royalties from the book's sales were donated to Wati, Sumiarsi's daughter, who had been a victim of this crime in her own way. Even after this shocking case, Gang Dali continued to thrive as Southeast Asia's largest red light district. In fact, even after Sumiarsi's case, Gang Dali remained bigger than Thailand's Patpong and Singapore's Geylang. However, in 2014, the Indonesian government began efforts to shut down Gang Dali due to public security and moral concerns. This sparked heavy opposition from local residents, many of whom relied on the nightlife industry for their livelihood. After much controversy, on June 18, 2014, Gang Dali was officially shut down. The area was redeveloped, and today, there are no longer any nightlife or entertainment venues operating there. In the end, the case of Sumiarsi remains one of Indonesia's most shocking crimes of the late 1980s and early 1990s, a case filled with tragedy and blurred lines between perpetrators and victims. But ultimately, the true victims were Purwanto's wife and children. They had done nothing wrong, yet they suffered the most horrific consequences. Especially Purwanto's wife, who was heavily pregnant at the time, along with their young, innocent children. This is a tragic story, but it also serves as a powerful lesson. Hopefully, this case will not just be a piece of history, but also a warning for all of us. Crimes like these should never happen again.